Welcome everyone to this Retirement Living Council member briefing. My name is Leda Pertz. I'm the National Policy Manager, Retirement Living here at the Property Council of Australia. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for today's member briefing. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Property Council of Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So a bit of housekeeping before we begin. We do have over 120 people who are viewing this briefing right now. This is also a live event, so unlike a Zoom meeting, you can't speak or raise your hand. There will be, however, opportunities to ask questions of our Speaker Tony and also our panellists later on. So you can submit your questions at any time during the session via the Q&A button, which is at the top right of your screen. Also, be sure to stick around until the very end of this briefing when I'll be telling you how you can access the new Census Snapshot report, which has the high-level data that will be revealed in today's briefing. So we're excited to bring you this briefing to unveil the 2020 PwC Property Council Retirement Census results. Today, we'll first be joined by Tony Massaro, who's a partner at Real Estate Advisory in PwC. He'll be providing an overview of this year's data results and also an analysis of industry trends. We'll then be going into a moderated Q&A session where Tony will be joined by Nathan Cockerill, who is the Managing Director of Retirement Living at Lendlease, and also Kerry Lehman, Director of Omega Communities and partner and co-founder of Brand Partners. So I'm now pleased to introduce Tony Massaro. Tony is currently the partner who leads the PwC Real Estate Advisory business in Sydney, Australia, which delivers innovative property solutions to clients through lead advisory, supporting encompassing strategic advice, acquisition and divestment support, and project delivery management. So Tony brings over 20 years of experience leading and advising both public and private sector organisations on property projects across diverse industry sectors, including retirement, aged care, residential, commercial office and industrial. And through his varied roles as both principal and as well as advisor, Tony has significant experience in both running property businesses and advising clients on property matters. I'll now hand over to you, Tony.
No worries. All right. Well, let me go ahead and say, first of all, welcome everybody. Great to have you here today. And although I'm used to actually having everyone in person and being able to get a bit of energy vibe from the room, so I'm going to have to try and throw it through the computer to you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then I should be able to see whatever is that I'm going to talk to you about. So I think that is up and being shared now, which is good. So again, I wish I was in the room with everyone because it's so much more fun, but right now we're going to do it virtual, and this is a good way of doing it and being COVID safe, and next year we'll all be back together. So again, on the retirement census this year, we had a number of folks that have really taking the time out in a relatively crazy year, let's be honest, and giving us the data. So massive shout out from in the beginning for all the operators that have taken the time to say, here it is, and let's do it. Now, this year we had a total of 65,000 units across 52 operators, a little bit less, slightly less than last year, a little different mix. Some people couldn't make it and put it in today. Others were able to and join us. So the reason why we do this, as in every year, is threefold, right? The first is to give data on key metrics that we're seeing in the census, in the industry, so that all the operators can look at and benchmark their performance and help set some KPIs. Some of the measures will be more interesting to some people than others, but we had good feedback that there's enough in there for everybody to get some good tidbits out of it, which is great. Second reason that we do this is to provide data to support industry in shaping public policy. And you would have seen that there's been a fair bit of policy that has come down this year. Some of the bits on buybacks, where the Property Council is in there and lobbying to support the industry all along the way. Having this data is a really good benchmark for them to be able to set factual realities on what they're briefing the government with. The third reason is actually to promote the greater investment and advancement in the sector. There are still a number of interested organizations, both domestic and international, that we see out there looking at the market, wanting to learn more about the market. I literally had a phone call with one out of the European area today that's looking at doing some stuff here. So there is absolutely interest around, and this enables us to be able to deliver as an industry some insights into what's happening. As always, the insights are only going to be as good as the data. So robust operator input is highly encouraged and much appreciated. You'll see as we go through here, and when you get the 8 pages that we give out at the end, that every question is not answered by every operator, and we respect that. Some operators don't have the systems to be able to collect certain bits and bobs of data that are being asked, but we have a really good material sample across all of the questions, which we're pretty happy about. Again, work in progress, so keep the inputs coming. So this year, as I said before, we had slightly less participants. So we had 52 organizations, which represented a total of 586 villages and around 65,000 units, which, again, when you look at it from a materiality perspective, it enables us to actually speak authoritatively around what information is actually coming, because we have a robust data set for all of them. And again, that big shout out to everyone, because I know it was a tough year given everything that was happening to also be sourcing this data. Hopefully it's getting easier for some of our participants that are return participants as we get systems set up to be able to collect it easily. 3 key trends this year that have come out of it. The first is a real positive one, and that is resilience, right? So there has been, unprecedented, using that word, change in some asset classes across Australia. But what we've seen, because this data is June data, that we have had a relatively resilient sector. So 2-bedroom ILU pricing, it was up to 463,000. So when we looked at what happened to a lot of other asset classes, the fact that this one was able to hold its own and operators were able to, in fact, keep a steady trend of price increases to benefit current residents as well as they're leaving, really good news story. In addition, vacant possession, while it's gone out 2 days, 3 days, relatively stable within that spectrum of how that trades. So really good to see that we haven't seen a massive blowout. And we know that anecdotally, we have had a lot of operators that have had move-ins, and very positive move-ins throughout the COVID period. The national average 2-bedroom ILU price, again, compared to the median house price in the area where that ILU is located, it's grown a little bit. So remember that a lower percentage here is better for residents, right? In that if they're selling their house and then they're buying their unit, they want to be able to have some money left over to help with other things, to give to their kids, take a vacation, whatever it is that they want to do. So that's grown from 64% to 67%. So when you start unpacking that and saying, well, why did it grow? Well, first of all, we had a price increase, but resi on average would have gone down in a lot of areas. So that's why that price increase has gone, why the price as a percentage has gone from 64% to 67%. But at a high level, you take those 3 bullets and you say, you know what? As an asset class, this has been resilient, which is really, really good to see. Second major trend is the increasing proportion of vertical and combination villages. Now, this has been a trend that has been increasing for several years now, but we're looking at 56% of new villages currently under development include a vertical portion, and that's up 9% from last year. So in a time when, in fact, we're probably seeing less overall development, from a proportionality perspective, it is clear that vertical villages are here and are an important part of the Australian retirement living landscape going forward. The third bullet point is related, and that talks about an overall decrease in planned development. So if we look at the current year census, our operators are expecting around 3,200 units to be developed over the 21 and 22 timeframe. Last year, that number was 5,000. So we can see that there is a material decrease in expected additional development of units right now. And probably that was brought on a bit from COVID, in that the ability of a number of our operators to actually get developments and to be working with councils to get development approvals through, people have become a little bit more conservative in their ability to get that through on time. So as we look at that, interestingly enough, we'll go through a few more metrics as we go forward. While that says, ooh, we're actually not meeting demand levels as an industry if we keep our penetration levels the same going forward. What that does say is, well, we're probably going to be soaking up a bit of that vacancy that has come up. So in the end, that's a better news story. But as we look at trying to provide for the needs of older Australians, we can see that there's probably some work to do in our negotiations with councils to make it less hard for everyone to get these developments across. Moving on now to some of the individual snapshots. This page was just talking about what we're seeing in villages. And from an occupancy perspective, we've gone down, but we haven't gone down in a massive way. So again, while that's a negative trend, it still shows a bit of the resilience. Overall, across Australia, we've come down to 87% occupancy from 89% last year. Now, I can tell you that when I was running my villages in the States and we had GFC happen, occupancies were coming down 6, 8, 10, 15% in some areas. So it's actually, again, a testament to the nature of the industry that we have built here. Noting as well that we do tend to have longer term residents. So it's not like people are going to move out on account of something like COVID, but that there are the figures. Now, in some of the different states, it's been a little bit different. You've had a few more in WA has come off a little bit more from an occupancy perspective than, whereas New South Wales is exactly the same as what it was last year. Average village size, that's stayed the same relatively. It's interesting on first blush when you look at some of this data and you see some of the newer ones being a little bit smaller, because we all know that there are some big villages that are being out there with several hundred units. But I think one of the reasons why some of the newer ones are staying smaller is because of that vertical trend that we're seeing. There are a lot more vertical villages that are being put into places where they're needed in brownfield locations, and we just don't have massive footprints, nor are you able to get massive heights. So a lot of those are at the smaller end. But again, they're hitting exactly what the local populace is demanding. On a village by type perspective, we spoke earlier around the vertical theme that is there, and as a result, the horizontals are now at 74%, and that's continuing to fall every year. Aged care, again, aged care has stayed relatively similar. Last year it was 29% as opposed to 39%, where they have co-located aged care in a village, and that's again showing, speaking with a lot of different operators, and Nathan will probably be able to shed some light on that later in our conversation around their concept of having aged care and how it has been taken up well at the locations where it's able to be done. Looking at the resident snapshot here, I'll start there in the upper right, looking at the current resident age, that has remained stable. The average age again is 75, which is a little bit up. It was 74 last year, but and the skew there is at 75 to 84, and in the 85 plus. Those buckets have remained relatively stable. That brings us back to the upper left there, which you guys have heard me speak about before, and we continue to see data which supports what I call demographic matching. As our villages get older, the resident proportion in those villages tend to be older as well. That is a phenomenon which is not unreasonable when you think about the logic. New people coming to a village, when we know average age is 75, look around and say, this village suits me. I feel like these people are my people. And then when we know that the average rate of stay in there is 8 or 9 years, well, then in 8 or 9 years, those villages are full of 84-year-olds and 83-year-olds. And so a new resident comes up there and says, hey, this is going to be more my speed. I like the newer villages as opposed to, you know, all these old folks out there. From the average tenure side of the house, that stayed relatively the same, where kind of at 7.5 of current residents, and pet, because they're not out yet, going out to 8.8. I think last year that was around 8.9 years. When we look at coming now to the affordability, starting in that top left, so average 2-bedroom ILU price compared to the median house price in most places, except for when we look at kind of broader SA and WA, this is a good news story for people who own their own house and are moving into retirement, in that the price is affordable and it will leave them some more behind to use to other things. We look to the top right there, our national average price increasing. So that is, I find that actually really a remarkable graph. It's testament to our operators maintaining and understanding how to preserve value for their residents, in that through the years 15, 16, 17, when residential prices were going up by 15, 20% in some areas, the retirement industry had a cumulative average growth rate of around 4.6% a year. With this year's increase being a bit less, that's down to about 3.9%. But if I'm a resident, I really am feeling good about this, because I feel like whenever it is that I'm choosing to leave, you've maintained a product which has consistent increases in value, which makes me feel better, and really protected the residents. From an operator side of the house as well, this is a good news story, because it is something where you say, well, we're able to still be delivering, as we know that costs are going up, we need to be able to have the revenues continue to go up. Down on the left there, a little new one this year, just looking at kind of the size pricing. The pricing, you can see the 463 number there, which is your average for a 2-bedder. And then we're looking at 1-bedder and 3-bedder and 3+. You're kind of having that jump of around 150 grand per additional bedroom. Something to think about when you're thinking about perhaps refurbing, and if you're going to be doing some refurb in some of the facilities, and maybe combining some of the old 1-bedroom stock that might not be moving as well into 2-bedroom stock. And then going on to the average sales days, we spoke about this before, stayed relatively similar from 258 last year to 261 this year. On the buyback guarantees, so kind of looking at the operating environment, everyone has seen from the Property Council getting the good word out there. There is new buyback legislation that is out there. So I think we'll see this no number decreasing next year, whereas we have a voluntarily percent of 41% and legislation, forcing the others, so that we have a total of 70% now are under some form of a buyback guarantee. From a home care perspective, top right there, it's an interesting, for those villages that are giving home care funding, that they have home care funding operating in the village, there's been a pretty big jump this year to combination, whereas last year there was a lot more that were just fee for service and self-funded. A lot more now are tapping into the government funding as well, which I think is a testament to some of the good work that a lot of operators are doing, in that making residents aware of their ability to tap into home care funding, from the government level. A new question that we have this year around reason for prospective sale cancellations shed some really interesting light when we say, well, we had some people have fallen down and they said they were interested and now they haven't. So why is that, right? And it's really interesting when we look at, so 19% their healthcare needs change. So maybe they were thinking they could live independently, but now they needed to go into an aged care. A big one, of course, is couldn't sell the home. So that's interesting to understand. When you unpack that, you come in against, well, unable to sell a home at a certain level of price? Is it at the price they wanted, at a price that enables them to buy an ILU? Looking at earlier data, that seems to be a little bit less probably the case. So it's an interesting piece of information to unpack further with your prospective sales residents when they're thinking about what it is that they want to do. Very small percentage there, though. I think from a good news perspective to all our marketers here today, only 2% choose a different village. And so that tells me that when they're there, they really are pretty keen to be in your village when they get to that percentage. On the bottom right there, when we look at some of the percentage of villages which are going to continue to seek accreditation, 67% said they're going to do that in the coming year. Cognizant of time, so I'll kind of go a little bit more quickly through it. We could talk about the service fees. They've come down a little bit on last year, which is good news for residents. Deferred payment structures, you know, you're seeing there's the no separate capital gains on an outgoing price, very, very small part, as those are some of the older contracts that have actually moved. And when we look at our maximum deferred payment, as well as deferred year payment and percentage payment, what we're seeing, if we look at those middle numbers there, so let's look at the bottom left, maximum year of deferred payment, 75% are in by year 8. Year 6 is the majority, 60% in are in year, so the median, year 6, and then 75% by year 8, and by year 10, you've got 97% of the villages. Similarly, when we're looking at a 30% maximum DMF, kind of covers our median there at 53%, and by 36%, you're at 98%. So you don't have too many operators that are going much more than that. Development, so that's one of our trends this year, which was interesting. We spoke about the vertical side of the house, where a lot of the new development includes a vertical space. Yes, facilities, so as a trend, facilities tend to be, our new developments have a lot of facilities, but the supply pipeline is probably the most interesting thing. Now let's think about that. There's twofold there. Number one, we need to think about the mix of people that we have in this year reporting. So if there are fewer major development play type of people in there, that will have an impact. But setting that aside, when we look at like for like, what we thought we would do, we've done fewer in the next 2 years planned. So I think it's an interesting testament to part of the reality of that councils continue to make it hard for us to get developments away, to get good developments in the right areas away. But you know, a lot of the developments I've been seeing, I've been going out and doing visits to a lot of different operators. There's some great developments that are out there. So I'm very enthused by the quality of development that we're seeing. We just need to make sure that we're getting enough out there to service all of the folks that need it and want it. So as usual, I can flap my gums for longer than many people would want me to, but that's a snapshot of today, and I will hand it back to you later to take it from here.
All right, thank you, Tony, and always happy to hear from you, so don't worry about that at all. Just a reminder to our audience as well, you can submit your questions at any time. Just use the Q&A button at the top right of your screen. We're now going to go into a moderated Q&A panel, so I'm now pleased to welcome our panellists. Firstly, we have Nathan Cockerill, Managing Director of Retirement Living at Lendlease, and also Kerry Lehman, Director of Omega Communities and partner and co-founder of Brand Partners. So welcome to both of you. As we wait for some questions to come in, I might kick it off with a question firstly to you, Tony, and then on to Nathan and Kerry, just around what you're seeing in terms of development. Obviously, there is a growing seniors population. So how well, Tony, is the data and what you're seeing out there in the field, how well is the development pipeline essentially poised to meet the expected demand nationally, but also in each state?
Yeah, so kind of following up on what I said a little bit earlier, Data, the amount of development that operators are telling us they're doing. Now, again, we have about a third of the market here captured in this roundabout from a units perspective. So it's not saying that's the only development that is happening, but there is, and if you look at the trend of this over the years, everyone is usually more optimistic on what they are going to develop, right? Every year we kind of say, oh, that was what happened this year, or they forecast 2 to 3 years out, and then in the very close end forecast, it always drops off because of some of the planning challenges, some of the operational challenges and the actual building challenges once we're on the ground that occur. So I think, to be clear, there is a good amount of development that is out there, that is happening, and there's still a good amount of development which is forecast, which is good. The developments that are happening that I've been seeing, very high quality and really out there meeting the needs of the residents, while at the same time maintaining that affordability, which is super important. But I think that as a industry, as we try and grow the development, I think that if we say we're going to keep penetration at 5%, we're going to slowly not be able to meet that. Now, there's a little buffer in that we have some vacancy, so that's one good thing that helps to absorb that new demand coming in. But when we look at the demographics, we can see that we are really sitting in this 21, 22 time. Is a lot of those baby boomers turning that 75, turning the age where we see a lot of them coming into our villages. Nathan, maybe you.
Sure, Tony. It doesn't surprise me that development has dropped off in your census, and sort of when the census was done, it was right at the start of or during COVID, where a lot of operators like ourselves reassessed our development pipeline at that point in time, and really, a lot of us did slow down given where COVID was and unsure of how long COVID restrictions would persist in various states. So it doesn't surprise me the pipeline did slow during COVID, and also I think part of the challenge also is that trying to find land is scarce, particularly where most of us operators want to develop these days. It's more of and you sort of talked about it in your presentation around the more vertical inner urban, metro type locations where, land is pretty scarce, and we know that our new seniors retirees are looking for that, the amenities and close to where they've historically lived. And so, scarce land. And the challenge also is that for us, when land becomes available, you're competing with the resi developers a lot of the time, and it's really tough on a financial metrics basis to really compete with those resi developers who, can pay a lot more above market price for the land. And we're seeing that more so now coming out of COVID, particularly on government land, where we're finding that the governments and councils are looking for a financial benefit than a social or economic benefit from their sale of their land parcels, because of some of the obviously the funding they've put into the economy over the last 9 months. They're looking to recoup that, and one way to recoup it is through land. And so there may be some come out, but it's going to be tough unless local governments and councils look to designate land to seniors living. And that's something that we're advocating for to help the sector really compete when land parcels come up for opportunities across the sector.
Great, thank you for that, Nathan, and definitely concur with your comments around the planning. We've had we did some research a couple of years ago, and definitely really highlighted how much it's been difficult for retirement to prove that it's sort of the best and highest use of the land. Kerry, might also just jump to you. What are you seeing around development and in the sector?
Yeah, certainly. And I guess as part of this later, I reached out to quite a broad field of other developers, operators and suppliers to the industry just to get some broad feedback at the same time. And there's definitely a consistent theme, and it fits with what Tony and Nathan have already said. It doesn't surprise me, as Tony said, that there's been a material reduction in the expected development of units. And that's really unfortunate, because I think COVID itself has actually shown more than ever a demand for the offering. And I think the flow-on effects in a few years' time with scarcity are going to be extremely challenging. I guess also an opportunity. Certainly in my discussions, there's a big appetite by developers to develop the units, but there's a huge amount of obstacles, and I think planning was raised as, you know, very high up there, as is land, as Nathan said. I think the ability to compete with resi is been the thing that I found the most common feedback. The fact that we do have to provide community facilities, we provide larger units to comply with SEP in New South Wales or other things in other states. All of those things mean that the resi developers can actually get higher yields and therefore put forward higher purchase values. So until seniors housing gets some other offsets and benefits in that process, then it's going to be difficult to even get the land, let alone then develop it. But I think there is an appetite. Then on top of that, you find that certainly in my feedback, it was a very common theme that there's at least 2 years to 3 years delays in most DA processes. Now that's hugely expensive, and you add to this COVID, and you know, I think Tony, your numbers in the next couple of censuses censi, do we call that, might actually move out. You know, we're going to find a really big delay in being able to take up that pipeline. I guess one other thing to comment on is I think that land lease communities in kind of retiree hotspots is probably picking up some of the demand, but for retirement villages that typically, you know, our opportunities are kind of more metro, vertical is probably the primary opportunity, but then that then comes down to financing challenges. And with banks requiring pre-sale rates at ridiculously high levels, dare I say, for, you know, unstaged developments, you know, most verticals aren't developed in stages. I think that's a really big challenge. And I guess one of the things I would like to flag out there is perhaps potential to have binding deposits might help to some degree. The fact that everything's totally refundable makes it very difficult for all parties in the mix to actually commit to those developments.
Absolutely, there's quite some challenges out there. So thank you all for that. We might jump on to the next question and might start with you, Tony, just to dive into the data a little bit more. So we have been doing this census with PwC for quite a number of years now, I think back till 2014, and we have been seeing some changes with the resident demographic over those times. So are you able to unpack that a little bit more? What have you been seeing in the resident space, who they are over the couple of years, and how has that been changing?
Sure. Yeah. So interestingly enough, one of the things that kind of came out, and you'll see it on the when you guys get the 8-pager, a big change this year in people who are actually in our units is we went from last year being 68% of units occupied by a single resident. This year it's 58%. So 10% swing, a really big swing. You know, our breakdown of men and women has been pretty stable, 63, 64% women for a long time, and men, you know, 36, 37%. But the singles and couples one is the first real big, interesting thing that we've seen. And, you know, we can opine on that, right? Like, and all of us on this thing could sit here and say, why is that? You know, maybe that during COVID, if you would say that, I can tell you that anecdotally, broad brush, there has historically been, in some instances, a reticence of the husband to want to move into a retirement village. The wife goes, let's move. The husband goes, nah, I don't want to. So what happens is she moves after he dies or goes into higher care. And perhaps with the, you know, the COVID and whatnot, it's made more husbands willing to say, yeah, okay, let's go in there, right? Clearly, people can see the benefits, and I think it was really interesting throughout COVID in retirement villages. Now, I know there was a little bit of a taint in aged care, but in retirement villages, you know, for the most part, there was a lot of people that looked at that and said, wow, I wish my mother-in-law or my mom was getting that kind of support that the retirement operators were stepping up and delivering. And so I think that's really given, that could be one of the reasons. I don't, you know, we can all talk about other reasons. Another kind of segment to that later is looking at the age of our residents. So we've been pretty steady with the age 74, 75. We've bounced around that for a number of years. The current resident age, what we have seen it shifting a little bit to the older, just as our residents are in there and they are growing older. and that's, you know, kind of comparison with the aging as it happens. And then the last one is kind of from a 10-year perspective. Over the years, that has probably shrunk, actually, and that's mirroring our stock as a whole in getting older, right? Yes, we are building new ones, but as the greater proportion of the stock grows older and we have that demographic matching, I would say the greater proportion of our current residents is also increasing as well. Over to you, Nathan.
So look, Tanya, look, I can guess why more couples are coming into the village, but I don't have any specific data around what's driving that demographic change. What I can say is that, you know, I do see a distinctly different type of resident now. You've got a group of residents who want the inner urban, you know, with the amenities close to amenities and the like, which is, you know, what we're looking at doing. Plus, you've got those who are looking for a lifestyle or a sea change type environment, who are looking for the coastal villages, whether it's in Victoria, New South Wales, or Queensland, or even in WA. So you do see, I am seeing two different types of residents that are looking for their retirement lifestyle. You know, so that is you know, something that we're looking at as part of it. And what we're seeing as part of COVID, and I think most operators are, we're actually seeing, you know, the children of the prospective residents, primarily the oldest daughter, being more active in the decision-making process of their parents looking for retirement villages. So, you know, during COVID, a lot of them were unable to visit their parents. Their parents were living in, you know, their homes, and they may have been overseas or interstate, and they were a lot more active around, you know, worrying about their mum and dad and looking at what the retirement living sector was providing in relation to the care and the information security, you know, right through COVID. And we have seen a lot more, you know, inquiry coming through from those people, and coming in, or inquiry online and bringing their parents through to look at this as an option. So you might find that could be driving the couples in more so, because you know, as I said, the children are more involved and are facilitating their parents to move in, where in the past, as you said, it was mostly likely that the male was not reluctant to move in and the female only moved in once the husband moved into higher care or passed away. And so that could also be another driver for why we're seeing you know, more couples come through. But for demographically, I just see there's two groups, or two main groups we're seeing, is that those people who want the metro with full amenities, connection to, you know, everything, their lifestyle is not changing, to those that are looking for the sea change and moving up to, you know, more of a coastal region with the broad acreage lifestyle type community that you're providing.
And I think to add to that, I think it really does, as you would know, depend on the village itself. So I think in looking around, there has generally been an increase in the proportion of couples. Much more evident in, I guess, sales off the plan would be a much higher proportion of couples, but in our own Amiga communities, you know, very much singles, very much increase in, you know, it's like an assisted living model. So the average age is 86. So it's going to vary a lot depending on village, depending on location. So yeah, definitely a small increase proportionally in couples would be common.
Sounds good, thank you. So Tony, we might stick with the resident theme just for another question, and then I'll flick over to Kerry and Nathan for some commentary as well. So a question has come through on the chat, just in relation to the reason for why prospective sales have fallen through. So one of the answers there is 21%, which is attributed to other. Just checking, is there any further details around that other? And perhaps Kerry and Nathan may also be able to provide some input about whether or not they're seeing those sorts of reasons, or are they seeing other reasons as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't get the additional data on the other as a response in the census. What I can tell you is, you know, again, anecdotally, and it'll be more interesting to hear from Nathan on this, you know, for me, you look at these big things and you say, okay, couldn't sell their home, health needs change, sometimes it falls into very personal circumstances, right? Like, oh, I needed the care for my child, or I decided I'm going to work longer. My wife and I broke up. Like there's so many different personal circumstances that were not captured by the large versions of I couldn't, sell the home, those kinds of things. But we honestly don't have, I can't even tell you subcategories as they came into, because they only came to us as other. Nathan, you would have a bit more view of that.
Yeah, Tony, so you're right. The two big ones are can't sell the home and also, health needs, changing health needs of the resident. Some of the other reasons for cancellation you get is, and we're actually seeing it decline, as I talked about before, is that, the children get involved late in the time and look at a contract and say, I don't like this contract from mum and dad, you're not moving into a retirement village, and so they'll cancel based on, an influencer, advising their mum and dad what they think's best for them. Ultimately, it's not the best for them. So, we see that. There's not a lot of other, as I said, very small is that they cancel because they're looking at multiple villages and they'll move across into another village. But as you said, that's relatively small across the time. So, I was surprised at other being 21%, because as I said, the majority of our ones are those two main reasons.
To be honest, to give a little speculation on the results as we get them, sometimes you'll find operators actually don't have that other split, so they'll just be like, well, I don't know the answer, it's other, you know what I mean? Like if they can't say hand on heart, it's these. So sometimes you have to read in between the lines.
And later, I was just going to add, I'm really glad that question was asked, because I saw the 21% as well on the report. And I thought, wow, that is a huge reason, being that these are cancellations, not reasons people don't buy, but cancellation reasons. Certainly, I guess the observation I would make is that I think in the last 6 to 9 months, I would have seen the impact of family a much bigger cause of cancellations than I've ever seen. They've always been a factor, but I think that they're proportionately, I would say might be a pretty big factor in there. And then the flow on to perhaps legal advisor. So, I guess there's a lot of negativity around and, confusion of retirement living, those sharks that have these bad contracts, which is, totally misunderstood. There is that kind of sentiment that has made people be quite nervous. The other one I've seen is where people, and it's family again, have been very strong advocates to their family to move into their granny flat, which I think is actually, quite disturbing in terms of the social impact of those things on those seniors. But we actually have seen a number of those cases across a number of projects in the last 6 months.
Thanks, and Kerry, and quite interesting that you mentioned the granny flats as well, because we've got a new question that's come in about basically other types of development that may be attractive for older people to move into. So Nathan, I might throw this one to you in the first instance, but the question is, do the panelists have a view on how the emergence of build to rent might impact future village development?
Sure, I'm not quite sure how it will. We've got to think through how it may impact future business, future developments. But I think residential as a whole, has become a lot closer to retirement living in relation to the amenities and the built form that they have, and particularly the pricing. So, as we move into more vertical, differentiation between a retirement living and a residential apartment is becoming less and less apparent at this point in time to the potential buyer. And so I think for us, it's going to have to drive us to the service offering, a different service offering that we have, particularly around, I think about some of the care and wellness offerings, and the lifestyle offerings that we can provide in a retirement village versus a residential apartment. And so I think build to rent's no different to that at the end of the day. I think the build to rent offering will be not dissimilar to the residential offering. They'll have really good built form, I guess, these big apartments. They'll have a concierge service, and they'll have shared amenities and shared rooms as part of that build to rent. So you go, how do we then differentiate ourselves, not just build to rent, but to the broader residential? And I think it's got to come down to, what our service offering is for care, and also our lifestyle offering that we have as well.
Nathan, I'll follow up with that. I agree with those points. I think that it will depend on what build to rent options come through, right? So build to rent as a or multifamily, as I grew up calling it, as an asset class, has some hurdles it has to clear in Australia to work. Some of those being tax hurdles, things of that nature. So one of the, so the question is, and then coupled with that, there's a broad perception, particularly amongst government, and in my mind, confusion around build to rent does not necessarily equate to affordable, right? So I think that you'll find some build to rent options are going to be along that. They're going to be on transport lines. They're going to be focused on the affordable housing end. They're not going to have all of the amenity that you'll see in some of the new higher end vertical villages that the retirement village industry offers. Now, not that all of them are super high end either, but I think it will come down to not only the different services, but how they're pegged, right? So in a build to rent where you have all different ages, and to some people they might love that multifamily feel of little children running around as well. Other people, in the same way that you have resorts that are child free and resorts that are family focused, other people might say, you know what, I'd prefer not to have all of multifamily that's in there. I mean, the ability to go and just rent an apartment is not a new thing that build to rent is offering, right? You can still go and rent an apartment in the old way. What build to rent will offer is higher service, right? So from a renter perspective, build to rent will probably be a better experience. That's what's meant to be. And I think our person who asked that question actually understands that well. And so my opinion, it might impact it a bit, but I don't see a material impact, because I think a lot of the multifamily is targeted and government is supporting it in terms of key workers. And then there's the whole, and that's separate from the affordable side of the house. Other ones will be targeted at high income, young professionals living in the CBD, that again, they're going to curate a culture and a vibe in those build to rents. And those that I've been involved in a few of them, like they're not cultivating we're trying to target the aged population here that I've come across yet.
Yeah, good points, Tony. Then, and Kerry, just to those points that Tony's made, are you seeing a lot of build to rent? Is it becoming a prevalent idea where you are in South Australia, and are you seeing anything potentially that may be for retirement living?
No, actually not personally. No, I can't say that it's very prominent at all.
All right, all good. Well, speaking of the services, we might jump to have a look at what are the facilities in villages. So we have been collecting this data over time, we have generally been keeping the questions the same around the different facilities that the operators are offering in their villages, so things like a pool, etc. Tony, what are we seeing in terms of how these facilities are changing over time, and the types of services as well that operators are offering, but also that residents are wanting?
Yeah, so thanks, Leda. I think that the trend that we're seeing is towards more and variation. So, and sometimes it's some of the newer things where people, so there's a lot around solar power. So this year, 41% of the villages offer solar powers. Some things have been pretty steady, right? So things like having a community center, having a bowling green. The community centers, 92, 93%. So we do know that there are villages that don't have them. Bowling green sitting in the kind of mid 40s, 45%. Wellness center sitting in the kind of mid to high 50s, 53% this year. There was 59% last year. Pool, again, close to 60, 58% of them having a pool. Cafes, which are probably a bit newer, that's still in the 20s, 23 to 26% over the last couple of years. And a gym, also mid 40s, 46, 47% of facilities are having gyms. So what we also say is that of the newly built facilities, most of those are targeting a lot of facilities. And and we'll always see a skew towards more facilities and better facilities in a higher end. Now, I think also what you'll see in some of our vertical villages, because of the lack of, open space, trails that you might find in a horizontal village, you'll find more of the gyms in the wellness center. And I think also what we'll see is an increasing trend on the wellness center when we look at actually deploying some of the home care and some of the, we all understand that there's a link between wellness, and longevity, right? So, and part of our role as villages and village operators is to try and increase the quality of longevity, i.e. the better wellness of our residents. And I think there are certain amenities and spaces that deliver that better than others.
Sounds great. And Nathan, what are you seeing in your villages with what facilities are you maybe making more of, or what are you seeing more demand coming through from residents and prospective residents?
Yeah, so Tony touched on the facilities that I think are common to every development. So it's got to be a community centre or a communal space, and the pool and the gym and the like. But what we're finding more so on our residents, particularly in the more inner urban environment, a lot of our retirees aren't actually retired. They're still on boards, or they're still doing part-time work and the like. And so we're thinking about, how do you create shared communal spaces where they can continue to work? Because we know our residents are working, they're 60 or they're 70 years of age at the end of the day. They're still sitting on a board or community work or whatever they're still doing. They want that space, and we're looking to say how to create shared spaces in our environment so they can continue to do that. So it feels like, they've got an office, because we know it's not just one or two. It's a number of our new residents coming in. So, we're thinking about that as part of the built form. A number of our new developments are looking for cafes and restaurants, as Tony talked about. So we're looking at how do you make that economically viable for a village. And so, can you have a cafe or restaurant that's street frontage that can be used by the community around the village as well as the village? And so do you have a shared cafe? So, it's not a cafe within a village that most of the time struggle to be self-funding at the end of the day, and the operator or the residents are chipping in to make up that shortfall. So how do you make that a more of a shared environment? But the other key that I think residents are asking for is the care and lifestyle services that I think a lot of them are looking at, and it's changing over time. They're not looking for the high care facilities or the high care services that are offered in aged care. They're after for the care and lifestyle services that mean that they continue to be active. They're active in groups. They've got someone they can talk to around certain aspects of their life and that. So we're looking at what type of service that we could provide to our residents as part of that. So I think the three things like are sort of moving down we talk about is that shared workspace or communal areas, cafes and restaurants, but how do you make that shared with the broader community? And then also the care and wellness type services.
Sounds good. And Kerry, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in terms of demand from residents about both the services and facilities? And has this been changing over the last couple of years?
I think in terms of how that may have changed during the pandemic, the facilities as such obviously haven't really changed because they are what they are, and they haven't been changing in terms of the physical ability to move those. But I think what has been found is the absolute priority that residents put on socialisation. So when they haven't been able to socialise, that has been a major issue. I think the challenge going forward is, if it's 2 square metres or 4 square metres and what kind of physical distancing is going to be required, setting up systems that enable retirement villages to actually nurture socialisation, but in safe groups. We did a survey across many villages of what residents want to do once COVID was over, quote unquote. And the number one thing was that they actually want to socialise with other residents, and it was above things like family, it was above things like holidaying. Their first priority was to socialise with other residents, and I think ensuring that the facilities and the operations are set up to enable that is going to continue to be a priority.
All good. Thank you. So we can squeeze one more question in. So in only a minute or two each, I might throw to you, Tony, first. What locations are you seeing driving demand for units? Is there something about metro, regional? Is there a sea change going on? Small units, large units? What are you seeing?
So I guess when I look at a heat map on where the development is occurring, it is obviously centered around cities, and then it goes out from there. I think of late, when you think about the infrastructure boom that is happening across Australia, these are the areas where government is saying transport nodes are going to be there, and what you'll find is that all kinds of neighborhoods will grow up around them. And so I think that these are the areas where you're seeing it. So there's the existing areas in metro where we're seeing a lot of the vertical, the brownfields being done, and I think you'll see some more of that following the transport corridors, because there's only so much infrastructure that's going to be built. It makes sense to build it close to the infrastructure and the amenity that comes with it.
All good, thank you. And Nathan, what are your views around this as well? Because I know you've got some exciting new developments, and out here in Brisbane where I am, you've even got one going up near Racecourse.
Yes, yeah, so you're right, Layla. We're trying different things. So we're trying, obviously we're building a retirement village next to a racecourse there at Doomben. We're also looking at we're in the process of doing a master plan for a village as part of a university, the University of Wollongong. So we're looking at how we can, have a multi-generational village down there connected to the university and the facilities at the university. So there's a number of those, different, developments we're looking at than the traditional broad acreage development that's happened in the past. But I agree with Tony that the majority of the developments is sort of, in the major metro cities, particularly Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. At the end of the day, we are seeing a little bit of, sea change of people moving up into the coast, as I talked about before. But the other thing we're seeing a little bit more of is that traditionally people have come into Retirement Village looking for the 3-bedroom double garage house, which, as Tony talks about, was the difference between the median house price. What we're seeing now is that some of the residents are looking to the smaller product to have more of their disposable income, so that they can do a lot more travelling in their retirement as well. So they're looking for the low maintenance lockup type retirement village, and using that excess cash that they've got to enjoy their life, which is a slightly different phenomenon we've had in the past, where they always look for the bigger unit and spending a lot of their the proceeds from their property sale.
Thank you. And we might just quickly go to Kerry as well, because I know you're quite unique there in South Australia with what you can offer. So what do you see in terms of driving demand for units there?
Oh, I certainly think not only in South Australia, but nationally, where we have exposure to villages, the interest in metro locations is definitely strongest for villages. I think that's also tied to the fact that the age of the resident is more like the mid-70s and above. Certainly, I think the land lease communities are capturing perhaps some of that younger retiree in those kind of coastal hotspots. But metro locations, which then drive through to vertical villages, is certainly what we're seeing as the most common provision of new seniors housing.
All right, thank you for that. So we'll need to wrap up the discussion there. I'm sure you'll agree there's been some interesting insights and trends that have been revealed today. So as alluded to in the briefing, we've been working with PwC for quite a long time doing this retirement living data. So this partnership has created some really quite good insights, which has helped us do advocacy with state governments across the country and also with the federal government. So a really big thank you to PwC for all of their hard work, and also a big thank you to all of those village operators who have been participating annually in the Retirement Census, and thank you for sharing your experiences and letting us know what's been happening in your village, in your business. So PwC have prepared a snapshot report, this is it, which looks at the high level data that was discussed today. So shortly you'll be able to access this report online as well at our website, propertycouncil.com.au/census. After this briefing, we'll also be sending out an email with a link to download this report, as well as a link so that you can rewatch this briefing. If you're a village operator who participated in the retirement census this year, PwC are busily putting together your personalised data-rich analysis report, which you'll then be getting in January. If you didn't participate, or you're somewhere else in the sector, perhaps you're not an operator, in the coming months you'll also be able to purchase the Retirement Census Key Statistics Report, which again will be on that website, an option to purchase it there. So a huge thank you once again to all of our speakers, Tony Massaro, Nathan Cockerill and Kerry Lehman, for their time. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, Leda. Take care, everybody.